Yankees general manager Brian Cashman. How does it feel so far? Is it good?
It's warm and cozy.
That's the way it should be. All right, just like an old leather shoe as we get going. Let's talk first about something I asked Jack about in our first segment, and that's this. Do you see yourself doing anything significant in terms of trade or free agency between now and the time pitchers and catchers report?
I don't. I think, you know, at least I'm open to anything, but I don't anticipate anything developing between now and pitchers and catchers showing up in spring training. But, yeah, keep your fingers crossed. If it's a good opportunity, we'll jump on it. But I think we've exhausted all opportunities so far.
Brian, I was wondering if you could take us inside your office for a few minutes here. When the offseason begins, do you have the names Castro, Hicks? And I know Chapman was a different situation because the price changed on him. But do you have those names on a board somewhere and saying, these are the guys I'd like to try and get this offseason? No, it doesn't really work that way. The way I start the winter is we have our pro scouting meetings, and so everybody descends and talks about the available free agents, and we pref them out first and foremost, although we haven't been active in free agency. But that's what that's how we start our program. And then obvious trade candidates I'll circle through, or teams that I've already whispered players that may be available, and we'll put them in part of the free agent rankings by position and where they would, you know, sort out. Then after that all, you know, ends, I get together with my immediate front office team, and we'll pick an organization every day. And tomorrow it'll be the Nationals, the next day it'll be the Reds, and then on Wednesday it'll be the Rockies, and so on and so forth. And, you know, we'll spend the evening, everybody going through the organization top to bottom, and then finding out what our perceived weaknesses they have would be, and then, you know, we look at, you know, where we may match up and what we would want from that organization. So then I'm taking notes throughout the entire process. So then when I start engaging opposing clubs and they potentially throw out, like if it's the Minnesota Twins, John Ryan, you know, we're looking for backup catching. We already had deciphered that. We had already looked at what we could possibly do for Murphy. Hicks was one of the names I threw out right away because we had already prepared the way we did. And about a month later, Terry Ryan swung around, and, you know, what he said no to earlier, he said yes to later.
All right, so let's say a Hicks conversation happens. How many people do you involve in that in terms of, you know, you said, hey, let's say the Twins want player X, Y, Z. Is that a fair deal? Is that not a good deal? How does you grade this player out that they want? How many conversations do you have?
A lot of internal. I mean, first and foremost, the most important thing is to know your own asset, and then try to do everything you possibly can to you know, really drill down on the asset you're trying to potentially get. So internally, I talk to, you know, I have our analytics team, I have our scouting team, and those are the two most important departments. And then when we get the sense that there's a potential of a match, then you really have to do an overdrive, because now you have to do a deep dive on the potential asset you're getting. So you start then reaching out to personnel, like you're in the 48-hour, 72-hour window. This thing could really happen, and you're making phone calls trying to find background, makeup, work ethic, you know, whatever hickeys may occur or exist, you want to know about them, if there are any, and then you go to ownership and make a recommendation, or you retreat based on the information you've collected.
You mentioned before, Brian, no activity in the free agent market, which is a rarity for the Yankees. I wanted to toss a hypothetical out at you. I know you guys are pretty much locked in at every position except second base heading into the offseason. Because this was such a deep free agent market, how much consideration did the Yankees give if you could have shed an outfielder to make a pursuit of somebody like Upton or Cespedes and take the one-year hit? Because I know you're trying to wait until you can shed some salary. Was that something you guys thought about?
No, you start playing around with things like that in the event that you find some matches. This winter, we definitely, you know, we have contracts on the books, as we all know. That's locked us into some commitments and where we are in our budget. Significant spending nonetheless. But we, you know, clearly had to become a little bit more aggressive and creative in different ways to thread a needle to try to find a way to improve the club as we move forward. And I think we found that. Found some opportunities that make enough sense, but it did force us to entertain and float a lot of weather balloons on players that are of significant interest to us. You know, like you know, whether it was a Brett Gardner or Andrew Miller, guys that are a huge part of our winning, but at the same time, because the you know, the contracts we're still living through, we had to throw some ideas out there and see if it stuck or not, to see if we could, you know, improve the club in various ways, but. Clearly, we didn't do anything because we felt holding on to those guys was the most important thing. But what we did transpire, we wound up with the Hickses of the world and the Castros of the world, and then in the very end, we jumped into the Chapman situation. And I think when the dust settles, I'm very pleased with how the winter has transpired. We showed patience, discipline, but we were, aggressively moving, high-end assets that we liked, but we felt we got a lot back in the same time.
We've said this phrase a lot on the show: younger, more athletic. Was that atop your board? Kind of like, let's keep trying to hit that mark of getting these types of players.
Well, it's a criteria we've set publicly. It's best to communicate honestly with your fan base, and I think we've executed a very vocal game plan for quite some time now over the last few years. Whether you turn the clock back to last year's Eovaldi and Didi Gregorius, and now this winter the additions of the Castros and the Hicks. So, and I'm sure I'm missing some guys out. Those are coming off the top of my head, but I think we've been very vocal about what we've been trying to accomplish, and we'll continue that path.
One of those younger, more athletic players is Castro, and I know that his job is to be your second baseman, but you've talked recently about how if he could have some flexibility and swing over to third, what that does for your roster in the event that maybe that 25th man on the roster, that extra bench guy becomes a revolving door for you.
That would be ideal. I mean, one of the exciting upside to the Castro acquisition would be the fact that he played shortstop. He was athletic enough to play shortstop. That's the left side of the infield. He's got the arm. He's got the athleticism. That a transition to third also should be in the cards. Doesn't guarantee it, but we saw him play second and play second so well down the stretch there with the Cubs, and we will definitely take a look at him at third, to be in a position to spell an injured player like Headley if that ever happened. Hopefully it doesn't, or even give him a day's rest if necessary. If Castro can do that, it gives us so much more flexibility with that 25th man on the roster. The 25th man could very well be a 13th pitcher. As we all know, our starting rotation, isn't, the 7, 8, 9 consistently inning pitchers on a per start basis. So having maybe access to that 13th up and down guy or an extra position player that you can utilize in a different way, I think that's vitally important to the weekly basis of how we can align based on the circumstances at the time, whether it's April, May, June, July, or August. And I think that's would be ideal. It would give us so much more flexibility and usability, much like the bullpen we used this past year from Scranton. Guys were coming and going, and I was sending out guys it seemed like every other day.
Let's talk a little more about Castro. You had to make a commitment in terms of taking on some salary. You seem to have some level of confidence that he can take a few reps at third base. Have you talked to him about that? Maybe making that transition at all?
No, sink or swim. But we got 6 or 7 weeks in spring training to figure that out. He will definitely get exposed to it. Joe Espada, our infield coach, with Joe Girardi. We'll get a feel for the number of weeks before the games start. And certainly Starlin Castro will give us his scouting report by how he looks and also what he thinks. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. Then we'll adjust and adjust accordingly and find an alternative that can handle that side of it for us, and then we'll obviously won't be playing around with much of that 25th spot, whether it could be a 13th pitcher or not. We'll lock into the normal situation, but if he can do that, it's a lot of upside for us.
Brian, when you guys acquired Chapman, on the conference call you were honest in saying, listen, we had to do our research, we had to do our own investigating into the alleged domestic violence issue that he was involved in. I had a two-part question. First of all, how tricky and how delicate is it to do that and then make the trade? And now once you've made the trade from a baseball side, what does Chapman's addition do for your bullpen?
Well, we certainly did as much work as we could possibly do. It's a serious, obviously, allegation and story, and that will play out. Whatever it will be, will be. I left Nashville, during the winter meetings. The Dodger deal had fallen apart. I ran into Kevin Towers, one of their top assistants in Cincinnati, who used to work for the Yankees and one of my close friends in the game, and I had a brief chat with him in the lobby before I checked out that day. And that planted the seed of, I wonder if I can get in on this thing. So I knew I had to do a lot of research, which I did. Then I had to have conversations with ownership, and that took a number of weeks. I certainly knew I could thread the needle with Cincinnati based on our deep farm system and the conversations I was having with Walt Jocketty. So once I got in a level of comfort of getting a full understanding of what took place down in Miami. Or just outside of Miami in the Davie, Florida area. And then, I started, talking to ownership and educating them about everything that I saw and recommending that we pursue this. And so eventually we got the deal done, and he's a huge addition, to the bullpen. There's not many arms like this walking around, in bullpens, and to collapse him in with already Miller and Betanzas is pretty exciting. And I know our fans are excited by it too, and hopefully we'll have him for a full season. We'll see, though.
And when you made that deal, was it with the mind of a super bullpen, or was it with the mind of, hey, Andrew Miller's been out there, maybe I haven't gotten any sort of deals that fit, but I want a starting pitcher back, that you could spin off Miller, or was it more about Betanzas, Miller, and Chapman closing things out?
We talked a lot about, clearly it gives you a lot of flexibility. You can do a lot of things. You could make a trade of Chapman. You could make a trade of Miller. But the intention was to keep them all together. Based on all the dialogue that I had internally with our ownership, was the excitement of having all three of these huge arms together and work backwards, towards the starters. And it's pretty exciting to have, if those guys are optimal and healthy and playing to their level of talent, it's going to be an event, watching the games late. I can tell you this, sometimes people leave the games early, 9-inning games. They got to get to the parking garage and get their car out before they hit the traffic, what have you. That's not going to happen much. I think people are going to want to stay around and see someone, especially in Chapman's category, throwing 103 miles an hour. That's something you don't rarely see. So I know that was taking place in Cincinnati, and I think it's going to be exciting to see in New York.
Fans will be getting those K cards out when they put them up in the stands. There's no doubt about it.